Hello and welcome to the Scientology Money Project on YouTube with your host, Jeffrey Augustine. An interesting show today. The drones on the East Coast of the United States are all the talk, and I wanted to do that, talk about that. And I want to say hi to everyone. Welcome. Who are you? Oh, are you? Denise, good to see you. Howard Taylor Esquire. Hey, Chuck, good to see you. Hubbard liked blue flash stuff. Is that related to blue beam? Yes, probably. And Project Bluebeam is the name of we're going to be discussing it on the show a little bit too. Anyway, I was rushed. Yeah, Chuck is just pure gold. He read through all the secret L. Ron Hubbard advices when he was at Author Services International, which was David Miscavige began as chairman of the board, Author Services International, before he became RTC. That was like the secret hideout when Hubbard was still alive, and when he died. And so Chuck sometime will have to come on, and we'll talk about it. Hey, what happened to the 6 levels of grifting videos? 6 levels of grifting. You'd have to refresh my memory. Can you email me? I've had doing some re-engineering of videos, 6 levels of grifting. Is that the bridge to total freedom? Yeah, Xenu. Okay, so this stuff I worked in technology 30 years. A lot of you have. We're all familiar with technology and computers. And this stuff, some questions I have is, Project Bluebeam, we'll get into it. But basically, in essence, it's a belief that the government, the United States government, or other governments in concert, one variation of it, in concert with an extraterrestrial race, will engineer a fake UFO landing using extraterrestrial technology or technology given to us by the aliens. And this will be to fake a landing and produce evidence that falsifies all human religions. And then there'll be the establishment of a one world government. There's different flavors and variations of it. So please, I understand that. That's just a quick summation that Project Bluebeam, this is going to be the one world government. And that's been a theme for a long time. So I sort of wanted to start out by laying the background and context. And a lot of you will recognize this. It's so let's just start out. Basically, I want to remove that. Hubbard created space opera, what he called space opera. This is actually from Wiki, and this is what a Scientology website posted. And you can find on Wikipedia, but this Scientology said that space opera, and this is L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology space opera, has space travel, spaceships, spacemen, intergalactic travel, wars, conflicts, other beings, civilizations and societies, and other planets and galaxies. It is not fiction and concerns actual incidents. And that's very important, because what Scientology taught and how it plays in the conspiracies is very interesting. Because Hubbard early on was talking, he began before Dianetics. He taught. I mean, he wrote science fiction and pulp fiction. So Chuck says, seriously, the most close Hubbard came to Bluebeam when Hubbard unpublished manuscript is Revolt in the Stars. Please put it in the links. And Revolt in the Stars, we're getting ahead of things. But yeah, Chuck, please, any links you want to post, because you are the expert, a lot of the unpublished stuff. So basically, the context of Scientology began with conspiracy, extraterrestrials, entities, and we're going to go through that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just lay a foundation. And so in the Bible, this is Ephesians 6:11 through 13. This lays a context of the war in the heavens, and later it would become the war in outer space. But 2,000 years ago. This is what Paul wrote to the Ephesians. He said, put on God's whole armor, the armor of a heavy armed soldier of God, which God supplies, that you may be able to successfully stand up against all of the strategies and deceits of the devil. So verse 11 says that you have to put on the armor of God, which is the word of God or the Bible, and that you may be able to stand. So uh, the Bible is often called the sword of spirit, the word of God. So you got to put on that armor, that spiritual knowledge, some of which is esoteric, because there is Christian mysticism and things. This is the key verse 12, where Paul says, for we are not wrestling with flesh and blood, that is only physical opponents, but against the despotisms, against the powers, against the master spirits, who are the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spirit forces of wickedness in the heavenly or the supernatural sphere. And so the verse is, for we wrestle not with principalities and power. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in the heavenly realms. So this idea 2,000 years ago, before technology, was that it all begins in the Bible, where Lucifer was the bright and shining angel above God's throne, the highest angel. And the Bible tells us that Lucifer at that time said in his heart, I will rise above the throne of God and I will become God. So that sin of pride, there was Lucifer led astray 1/3 of the angels, the Bible teaches. And I come out of a Christian background, so I'm just laying context, not preaching per se. But the Bible teaches that Lucifer, the bright and shining angel, took 1/3 of the angels in heaven and led a revolt. And he was cast down from heaven, because Jesus later said, this happened way back when on the time track. So the revolt in heaven, the war in heaven, Lucifer was cast down. And then that's when his name changes to Satan. And that's the simplified version I'm giving. And Christianity sees fallen angels becoming demons, and they're the ones who tempt humans to engage in various sins so that you will not come to a saving knowledge. So this is gnosis, or the sacred teaching of the Bible, some of which, and the way the Bible was put together, we're not going to get into that. But basically, there's a war in heaven, and it's played out here on earth. So the principalities and powers are spiritual beings who don't exist in human bodies, but they can exist in human bodies. They can shape shift. They can do different things. In the Bible says that 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 demons can impersonate angels and so on. So you're dealing with a war that's played out on the human plane that begins in other realms, and that's the spiritual version of it. And then it has a technological shift where it becomes different. We're going to show you why, and why Scientology plays into it. Now, at the idea of a war between God and Satan, or the forces of good and evil, this is Satan. He would be the highest demon, and so this was the belief, and still is, that there's Satan, and he's fighting God, and the war is being played out here on earth, and the prize are humans, whether they will go to heaven or hell. And Satan acts to deceive even the elect, the chosen of God, by spreading false knowledge and lies. So I guess you could get creative and say Satan was the original father of fake news. The Bible says that Satan's the father of lies. So the goal, and that's a pretty good way to say it, to update that verse, is that Satan is the father of fake news, if you're so inclined. So the goal in classical spirituality is to see through the lies of Satan. And the way they used to say it is the world, the flesh, and the devil. So the lies of your own self, the lies of Satan, and the temptations of the flesh. So you had to overcome the world, the flesh, and the devil. But this gets more interesting because it's expanded. So it's about you on a salvationary level, but it's about all of the globe. Um, Now, there's a hierarchy, a satanic hierarchy, just like God rules over all the angels and humans. And there's a satanic hierarchy. So these would be the principalities and powers of darkness, with whom the holy must wrestle daily, and that's by purifying themselves. And that's interesting. There's a purification of the body by fasting, prayer, purification of the mind by contemplation. And this goes through a lot of ancient schools, not just Christianity. But this is a great picture of a satanic hierarchy. So one element of a conspiracy is there must be a hierarchy. There must be dueling hierarchies at play. So there's a hierarchy of good controlled by God. There's a Christian version of this, of course, where there's God and his son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. And there's other good hierarchies, and then there's evil hierarchies. And these get played out. But this was a great illustration to give you the idea that in any conspiracy must have a hierarchy. And there's a good hierarchy opposing a bad hierarchy. And we here on this planet, we can become pawns of the bad hierarchy. We can be controlled different ways. And it used to be the idea, the battle for the mind of humans, for your mind, for the mind of all. That's what's at stake. Will we be enslaved, or will we know the truth? And that's kind of the classic spiritual background in the Western tradition. It's slightly different in the East, and we're not going to go really Eastern. I'm going to stay Western. But Buddha had the realm of hungry ghosts in it, Buddhism. So there's a lot of parallels, but I'm just going to stay with Western spirituality, though we're going to go some into the East. So that's the idea of these influences, principalities and powers in the heavenly places. And later, through technology, they would become alien overlords. Wow. So that's this. Now, Alfonso de Spina, this is like 1450. He put a classification to demons. And this gets interesting because there's classifications or beings or entities, and this applies in Scientology. You can have real powerful clusters of body thetans, evil body thetans, and low-powered, fairly innocuous, unconscious body thetans. But this is an interesting hierarchy. So demons of fate, demons who influence the destiny and outcomes of human lives. So what happened, early on, spiritual teaching anthropomorphized these forces, and they anthropomorphize them. They become personal. So there's actually demons who are targeted in the hierarchy. Some demons are targeted by the devil, Satan, whatever the name is in your tradition for the highest bad guy. So some are targeted to influence your destiny and the outcome of your life. So you might miss your life's purpose. There's the incubi and succubi. They engage in sexual activities with humans, often leading to the birth of hybrid beings called cambions. Now, this is interesting because DNA will come into play later. DNA. This was before DNA was known about. They had, prior to the flood, the antediluvian period, there were giants in the land and things like that. So cambions and other demons born from the union of a demon with a human. And so there's these. Back then, they believed that demons, people could be half human, half demon, literally, and they didn't have DNA, so they just had to say born of a union. So you could have these half human, half demon people who were real evil, and that was a way to explain maybe psychopathy, a lot of sadistic, vicious, vile people. They were demonic or demonically possessed, or they were half demon. And then familiar spirits, nightmare demons that could cause you nightmare, demons that attack saints. So if you were especially holy, you would have a special demons that were assigned to attack you, demons of lies. Now, this is interesting because it's demons who specialize in deceit, spreading falsehoods, and leading people away from the truth. And right now on our media landscape coming out of the 2024 presidential elections, there are charges going back and forth. I'm not getting political. I'm just saying there's charges going back and forth that President Trump will destroy the world or he'll save the world. And ABC's lying and CNN's lying and InfoWars is collapsing. And so you have this information warfare about what's real and what's fake. And so that goes into conspiracies where one side will say this side is lying, other will say that side is lying. It plays out in the courts of law, it plays out in churches, it plays out in the media. So you have this hard left-right polarization in America. And it concerns about how do we know the truth? Because any conspiracy has at its base is that they, whoever they are, they're evil, the demonic hierarchy, they don't want you to know the truth. So they're going to lie to you through false information, lies, deceit, deception, temptations. And later they're going to do some engineering of a technical nature to affect mind control. So I'm just moving quickly through some history to lay the ground. Any questions? Just ask. So there's demons that I thought this was so specific. Demons that try to deceive old women into attending the witch's Sabbath. That cracked me up because it's just very specific. It's like if you were a demon, you'd want to be like a demon of fate or a demon that attacks the Pope. You wouldn't like, okay, you're a demon, you're going to go deceive old women into attending the witch's Sabbath. It's like it's kind of a low-level demon job. It says demons that prey on vulnerable individuals, especially elderly women, convincing them to participate in witchcraft and attend the infamous witch's Sabbath. That's like they're already old, and you're going to get them to go to a Sabbath. That just would be disappointing. You know, if you were a demon, you got that assignment. That's pretty low, especially and why not men? There's not a demon that just tries to deceive old men who are far more foolish. And then there's demons of heresy, demons that promote heretical beliefs. They lead people away from traditional religious teachings. So there's heretical beliefs, and the heretical beliefs can be anything. So modern conspiracy theories, I'm going to show you some. So that's kind of the basis. There's this of old before technology, everything was expressed as spiritual, supernatural, influencing the physical. And it was a spirit matter divide. One thing I say in my self-published book, What Caused the Big Bang, available on Amazon, is that there's spirit matter. Spirit on one side and matter, and I compound the word into spirit matter. You really can't have this without the duality of spirit and matter, which is a construct or a model. Arguably, I'd rather talk about consciousness. I'm getting off the topic. But this was all spirit matter where good spirits, evil spirits, God and the devil, and you're in a physical body only temporarily. And so there's a lot going on, and that's why you have to go to church and believe and pray and resist temptation and all that. And you have to depend on somebody to tell you the truth from lies. Yeah, and spirit matter is plasmoids. Well, there's certainly a lot to be said. There's a lot of, I'm not taking sides. I'm just showing, I'm going to show different things here. So that's kind of the classical teaching. Let me see if I have this. And what I'm going to do is, let me see what I want to do. Okay, I'm gonna lead a couple things. Let me just see. I'm checking. I've got my slides ready for you. Let's see, where's this one? Okay, now fast forward. A couple things happen. with the rise of technology. By the way, there were airships and objects in the air seen throughout history. In the 19th century, the Midwest America, there were quite a bit for several nights that went on. Yeah, the Eastern concept of the subtle body is a kind of spirit matter. Yeah, I agree. Consciousness. Um, and I'm not going to get into that's for another show, but yeah, it's kind of a spirit matter duality. You have a different nested bodies. So the rise of World War II changes a lot of things. World War II changed a lot of things. And I'm going to go to, okay, what happened is this, I'm going to make a big jump. So we have the base of Western spirituality, spirit matter, good and evil. Okay, we're good. Now, during World War II, there was the OSS, and this was the American organization. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. This was the the predecessor of the CIA. And what's interesting about this is you can see that this is an organization designed to protect America. It was designed to spy, infiltrate, destroy the enemies of America and the Allied powers. So you can see how it engaged in. If we do an overlay, this is sort of a secular view of almost the war in the heavens. But this was where America was what needed to be protected. And this is an org board. Scientology thought it's, Hubbard claimed to have invented the org board, but they've been around forever. So this is spying, and this goes across intelligence, disinformation, propaganda, special projects, field experiments, operational group command. So the United States and other Western intelligence services, and also the Axis intelligence services, in World War II, and I realize I'm making a jump, so I can't fill in everything in the short time we have. So it's really interesting. Oh, you know what? That painting from 1500 something depicted UFOs. Yeah, the hierarchy. We're not going to go into Zechariah Stitch and Ancient Aliens on this show, but we certainly can, because this is just in the time we have, So anyway, we know that there's government agencies, the OSS in this case, spreading propaganda not only to the enemy, but to the American people. For example, what was interesting is some people, there's a school of thought that said that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president in that period, wanted Pearl Harbor to happen and he knew about it, did not act to prevent it because he wanted America to go into the war when America was isolationist. So the idea that the government is withholding knowledge from the American people, it goes way back to the founding of America, that the government's withholding knowledge. That's always been a thing, that the government is the enemy of the people in some cases. So the OSS, right in the middle of this, before it goes to the CIA, this changes everything. And I'm talking from my lifetime experience. I remember I was not born during Roswell, but the flying saucer crash in Roswell was such a big deal. It made the news globally. That there was a crash in Roswell, New Mexico, and a flying saucer was captured, and they also captured some aliens. The story came out in parts, and I'm just again hitting highlights. So there's actually UFOs, and the U.S. Air Force got some, and they maybe got some other things. So this got quickly clamped down on. If you've read the history of Roswell, it's fascinating how quickly everything got clamped down on. And the next thing is Army debunks Roswell flying discus. World simmers with excitement. You can see the upper right hand. Officers say disc is weather balloon. And I remember I remember there's one of the drones right there. I want to show that. Um, Jumping ahead. But I remember growing up, I was born in 57, but I remember talk of Roswell and UFOs was all consuming from the time I could remember. My dad and his friends were really interested in UFOs. We would go out to Joshua Tree to do some mining, uh, looking for my dad had a metal detector. We did some hard rock mining. We used to go up to the rivers, and my dad liked that kind of stuff. Um, but we'd also go out. Uh, a lot of the boys and fathers would go out looking for UFOs to see if we could see anything out in Joshua Tree or parts of Antelope Valley where there were said to be clusters because Edwards Air Force Base out there in Antelope Valley, California, which is Lancaster, Palmdale, that was a hot spot of UFO activity, according to, and there was early groups like MUFON and things looking for it. So I remember growing up, uh, with the argument around Mage Runner, it was agreed that given the size of the universe, there had to be other planets and civilizations. That was based on the Drake equation, which used to be accepted, but is not so much anymore. So Roswell really blew things apart. Now, after the war, the Central Intelligence Agency was formed. So the OSS ceases to exist. But a lot of the people got carried over, into the Central Intelligence Agency. And so this is the CIA org board. So there's moving from left to right: intelligence, national clandestine service, science and technology, and support. And you can see how much is needed. You even need human resources department. People can accumulate, vacation time. They get overtime. They get pay for dangerous missions. And so you need this whole support apparatus. And you even need to get different currencies. If you have a CIA vehicle, you have to get the vehicle somewhere, buy one, pay for gas. There's a lot of logistics that goes on in intelligence. That's a point I could have made better in a previous interview, where you just need a lot of people doing stuff. One thing I will say is espionage and intelligence is not just James Bond going out doing it himself. There's a I mean, nowadays there's so much. This is why I wanted to show you the depth. You need satellites, spy planes, gas for your vehicles. You need a headquarters building. You need electronic devices. You need the floors mopped at night, the waste baskets emptied, secret stuff shredded. You need background checks on people. If you went through the whole thing, you need linguists, you need people who can speak all the languages in the lands in which the CIA operates and interpret. So linguists, translators, interpreters. You need weapons. You need to interface with the FBI. So there's so much that goes on. There's a lot of management and operations and logistics. So it's very sophisticated, but a lot of it, the main thrust of it is they're going to hide stuff from the American public. So will the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover was certainly holding his cards. J. Edgar Hoover, everyone was terrified of him when he was alive, because a he was a version of Scientology in that he had the dirt on everyone. He weaponized the FBI and he spied on people. He had a whole bunch of secrets on all the big players in DC, and they were terrified of him. Is Osabas Linda Hamill a reptilian grave alien from Barnard Star? Quite possibly, yes. Did she come in through the Himalayas about 2,000 years ago when this new group knocked out the Nazi group? I don't have access to Linda Hamill's PC folders, but I suspect you're right. I think yeah. Goldwater, that's Senator Barry Goldwater, who ran for president in '64, who's once said extremism in the defense of liberty, there's nothing wrong with that. And I remember him saying that when I was a young kid, my dad telling me about that, what it meant. Barry Goldwater once asked Curtis LeMay, that's General LeMay, who was in charge of U.S. strategic bombing forces. He oversaw the bombing of Japan and in World War II. Then he created Strategic Air Command. So these are two big players. Goldwater was in the Air Force. Goldwater once asked Curtis LeMay if he could see the Blue Room, where the alien technology was supposedly held, and LeMay said no. Doesn't necessarily prove the reality of aliens, but it's interesting. It is, because supposedly there's an airbase, and where they're keeping this, and then there's Area 51. So in World War II, a lot happens. There's Roswell. They open Edwards Air Force Base, and which had been around a long time before World War II. They changed the name to Edwards in honor of a pilot who died. And then they created Area 51. So you have a lot of stuff proliferating, happening fast. It's overlapping. So let's go back. So we have the CIA. This plays into the conspiracy and what's going on now. What is going on with the drones? Scientology has also railed against the CIA. Hubbard was really mad at the CIA because the CIA, Hubbard was convinced, was poisoning the Mediterranean ports against the Apollo, his ship. And that's why they ran out of ports they could stay at, because they were called the CIA ship. And that's one reason Hubbard created Operation Snow White, which, if you think Scientology had a good intelligence service, they were programmed Snow White fell apart. That was an organized burglary ring to steal records. And then, they got arrested because Michael Meisner, they didn't take him overseas or hide him or pay him off or kill him. So, Adorable Anarchy. Oh, happy birthday. I'm glad you're spending it with us. What a great thing to talk about. Aliens, Scientology, secret stuff, Gnostic, demons, principalities and powers on your birthday. That's a great way to spend your birthday. That's why it's so fun to be esoteric. Okay, so the big bad CIA, and now we also put in to insert L. Ron Hubbard into the picture. Of course, we have Jack Parsons, rocket fuel scientist. And of course, we know the story of Hubbard hooking up with Jack Parsons, and Parsons was influenced by Aleister Crowley, the Beast, 666. And this is where Scientology gets plugged into the equation through L. Ron Hubbard. And, Jack's genius was to take asphalt and mix it in with, I believe, nitroglycerin. And he created solid rocket fuel. And those became the JATO bottles, jet-assisted takeoff. So you had this genius rocket fuel guy who was a co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Labs. And he was into the occult. Fascinating guy. I'll give you an interesting term. When Parsons was working on rocketry, with his boss was Theodore von Karman at JPL, and Parsons had a term called blowdown, and that's when the fuel from the rocket blows down. Hubbard took that term and applied it to Scientology e-meter, a blowdown. That comes from Jack Parsons. That's a little bit of Hubbard parroting pop culture technology to put into his thing. So blowdown originally was a rocket term, is a rocket term. You can look it up, blowdown on rockets. Yes, they did throw rocks at Hubbard's ship, accusing him of being CIA. Yes, they did. And my lovely wife, Karen, was on the ship, Janice Grady. That was they later called the Rock Festival. And what port was that? Was it Madeira? I believe so. Someone put if they know where the Rock Festival happened. Okay, so you have now L. Ron Hubbard launches, as I shared in my last podcast when we went through book covers. L. Ron Hubbard launches Dianetics first in the pages, because Scientology does not exist till 54. He launches his Dianetics. So he launches it in the Astounding Science Fiction edition of May 1950. You can see at the bottom corner left, Dianetics, a new science of the mind. So this is interesting because You have Dianetics launched in a science fiction book, and this is obviously on another planet because this fellow with the yellow cat eyes, this ruffian, you can see rocket ships behind him, like he's guarding ruffians. And back then, I guess aliens like this who had thick black hair, not quite the David Miscavige pompadour, but close. And he's wearing these thick wristbands. And what cracks me about the period of this time is all the alien types would wear these long, thick wristbands. Don't know what it's about, but and then he's wearing like a not a Western belt buckle, but kind of like a space. So anyway, L. Ron Hubbard launches within a science fiction magazine, and he also, as I mentioned, he did another article in the Explorers Club Journal of 1950, spring 1950. So, and then he launches Dianetics. So there's first John Campbell supports his launch of the book with sci-fi and astounding science fiction. Then Hubbard launches Dianetics, and as we mentioned in our last podcast on book covers, L. Ron Hubbard's book cover was made to look like, in my opinion, an IBM punch card. So by this time, L. Ron Hubbard's aware of Roswell. He's aware of psychiatry and how much he hates it, and how psychiatry, he believes early on that psychiatry was an evil plot to control mankind through lobotomies and chemicals, even though Hubbard was not averse to using it. But you can see how by this time we have computers. So again, as technology increases, conspiracy theories can expand to include technology. It's just automatic because there were not computers in the Bible. I know there's the Babylon battery and there's some early computer things, but anyway, Hubbard launches. So we have computers, we have the CIA, we have Hubbard already has kind of a plug and play culture that he can pop Dianetics into. He can talk about the mind, how to control the mind, pain drug hypnosis, how the psychs control the mind. He has an enemy. He has the CIA. Hubbard used to contact the FBI all the time to turn in people who he thought were spies. He even did that before Dianetics when he was up in Alaska with his wife on the Alaskan expedition. Their boat broke down. He had to borrow $400 to fix the boat. Didn't pay the loan, but he turned in someone for being a spy. So there was all these things that come together. Now we're going to go. Which was this? Let me look at my slides. Oh dear. Okay. Let me see. I have to go back because I organized these for you. Okay. Now, here's what happens. Okay. DNA is discovered by Francis Crick. I don't recall the exact year. And some of these conspiracy theories, it's like backdating a check. They if it's today is December 16, 2024, backdating a check, we don't use checks, but sometimes, mooks to cover up what they were doing would write a check for dated November 1st, 2024 and say, hey, I paid it already. Well, a lot of these conspiracy theories in Hubbard, Hubbard was also a Berea ventriloquist with psychopolitics. Yes, Hubbard issued a book called Psychopolitics. And so he was into brainwashing, mind control, psychopolitics. And he claimed the book was dropped under his door, and it was by Berea, Stalin's chief of terror. See, there's too much to fit in. We'd have to go 3 hours. And maybe we will one day for the truly committed, or those who should truly be committed. You should see what I did. I made a joke there. Okay, so yeah, Hubbard's into, thank you, Adam. Hubbard's into this manual of brainwashing that he gives to government people, and obviously it was written by him. And he's claiming he has all the secrets. Hubbard had claimed that the Soviets, the Russians, offered him a lot of money and a laboratory if he would take Dianetics. Such crazy lunacy. There's just too much here, folks. There's a wealth of material. And I guess, we spend a lot of time. Okay, so I'm going to go into the conspiracy theories. And I'm not attacking them. There may be some truth to them because usually there is always elements of truth, but I'm going to talk about just from my experience, okay? And I'm seeing a timeline, and we're going to get to the drones and Scientology. So, one of the leading theories out there is that in 1952, I believe, 54, 52, 54, I think 52, President Eisenhower, who was a five-star general, the Supreme Allied Commander, Europe, Allied Forces, just a, I mean, five-star, he led D-Day. He commanded the D-Day invasion. He was a two-term president of the United States, just a great American. He chipped a tooth at dinner. He was visiting Palm Springs when he was president. And then he has to get on the presidential airplane, which they didn't really have. It's not like Air Force One. He just had a plane he checked out from the pool. They later made it Air Force One. But he disappears. And he's supposedly getting the crown of his tooth fixed because he chipped it. And he has to go fly to see the presidential dentist rather than getting a local dentist. So the theory is that Eisenhower flew up to Antelope Valley, I believe it is Edwards Air Force Base, and met with aliens and negotiated a treaty whereby aliens who had weakening DNA, needed human DNA to enrich their DNA. And so President Eisenhower agreed in saying, if you give us your advanced technology so we can stay ahead of the Soviets, we'll allow you to, you know, call a certain part of our population. That means kidnap, take people, just take them and get their DNA and conduct experiments on them. And these were where the alien probes and people taken aboard ships and probed invasively. And some people just disappearing because the aliens, their DNA was weakening, the story goes. And so in exchange for things like semiconductors and transistors, because you were working with vacuum tube technology, Hubbard or Eisenhower said, sure, you can kidnap Americans, you can take cattle, you can do whatever you want, but we get the hardware to stay ahead of the Russians. And then later, fast forward as part of this, these pictures emerged. I remember when they came out, these were supposedly pictures of the alien autopsy at Roswell. They they captured some of the members of the flying saucers that crashed, and they talked for a while, but some of them died, and they did. You'll remember the Roswell autopsy. So this is one of the things where extraterrestrials come into play. And Hubbard in his Pulp Fiction writing had already been writing about other planets and other civilizations. And early Scientology, what's interesting in early Scientology, Hubbard, in Dianetics, he said life began at conception. That's in the book. But then he changed it. There's past lives, and he created a time track for a lot of reasons. God let you go back to the beginning of time for 4 quadrillion years ago, Hubbard said. But it also gave him more to audit, because if you could only audit one lifetime, it's not as good as auditing back 4 quadrillion years for all your incidents. So anyway, Hubbard in the early 50s would talk about, he made himself a local galactic celebrity by talking about the political situation in this sector of the galaxy with the fourth invader force, fifth invader force, planets, implanting stations on Mars. And he would talk knowledgeably as if he were just up on the politics of outer space here locally. He would talk about going up in the Van Allen radiation belt out of body, where he would say that space is quite warm. Space is quite warm, and I was up in the Van Allen radiation belt. One of my favorite stories. I created an org on my OT It Is Great satire blog called Varbo, the Van Allen Radiation Belt org. That's where they deliver OT 9 and 10. So Hubbard talked about the local space station, and this sort of, I'm not sure when, what year, the idea of President Eisenhower meeting with the ETs, what year that came about. I do remember the Roswell. So a lot of this timeline I don't have down. I just, there's sites out there where you can get it, but this was part of it. So extraterrestrials, Um, Extraterrestrials, in one sense, replaced angels and demons. So the classical older Western spirituality would have angels and demons, God and the devil. Now those morph into extraterrestrials. And what happens is these ETs make contacts with humans in exchange for technology so we can fight off the Russians. I had one person tell me, look at the SR-71 spy plane. It comes out of nowhere off slide rules. There's no way you could do that. Then transistors suddenly come out of nowhere. Seemingly, it's just the speed of technology, Moore's law. But uh, some people write about it, and there's a book called The Day After Roswell, and it was a colonel who said he was in charge of taking alien technology and putting it into American aerospace. The Day After Roswell. If someone could look that up, The Day After Roswell, it's Colonel Philip J. Corso. That's an interesting book because he said he was the actual officer in charge of integrating things like fiber optics into the American defense complex, and then they would become civilianized. So fiber optics were used. The aliens gave them to us, Colonel Corso said. We used them in military applications, and they were put into things like medical applications for endoscopy, so on. That's interesting. So this theme fits into conspiracy. Also, after World War II, there was another school that said Hitler escaped from Berlin and he went down to Argentina. In Berlioz, excuse me if I don't pronounce it right, Berlioz. But this book on the right, bestseller, it says on a bestseller, so it must be Hitler in Argentina, the documented truth of Hitler's escape from Berlin. And then they talk about these theories talk about a secret, the hollow earth, and that the Nazis had underground bases in the hollow earth in Antarctica. And there is a kind of a story that's interesting about Admiral Byrd after World War II went down to Antarctica with a big fleet and supposedly got into quite a fight with the German flying saucers. And there's an idea that the Germans had flying saucers. And this picture here I really liked. It looks like what would that? Those would be Hellcats, World War II Hellcats fighting Nazi flying saucers in Antarctica. So you can see how geographically it spreads. So it includes the CIA, Nazis who escaped. We took German scientists in Operation Paperclip. That is our government. The CIA did Operation Paperclip. So there's plenty of material that goes on. And Hubbard's watching it all. And he doesn't do a lot with it blatantly, but you can see it's in the same thing, that there's secret knowledge involved. There's a group, at some point, there's a group of CIA people connected to ETs, and they would form the Illuminati, the secret government or the shadow government that really controls the world. So there's the emergence of that thing. So we go from a demonic hierarchy that rules the world to the British monarchy are reptilian shapeshifters. So that's the kind of rich ground we have to deal with. I remember now there's the flat Earth people, so that plays into part of this too. The people now I remember this is very dramatic for me. I was in first grade in 1963 on the playground, and one of my schoolmates ran up to me and said, "The president was just killed." And I was at school and I was shocked because back then respect for the president is different than it is today. You respected the president. And for President Kennedy to be killed, it was shocking. And that set up the longest running conspiracy theory in America, one of the longest running ones, because they still haven't released the papers on the Kennedy assassination. That blew apart. That really went big because did the CIA go after him? Did organized crime, the Soviets, who went after him? And I remember that. Yeah, and so the JFK assassination, where a president of the United States is killed on television, and then of course one of Scientology's private investigators was a sound expert, Anthony Pellicano, who did work for Tom Cruise through Burt Fields. Anthony Pellicano did an analysis of the sound, and he found the second mic, and he is the one who helped create the idea of the second gunman on the grassy knoll. So there's so much in the Kennedy assassination. And Hubbard had written a letter to President Kennedy offering to train NASA astronauts, and never heard back. My Catholic grandma was watching me when JFK was shot. I was 5 and it's burned in my memory. Same here. Anyone of our era, Joe, boomers, will remember where you were when Kennedy was shot. That's a defining line. And to me, it was just shocking. A lesson I drew from it, and this is interesting, this is personal to me, is they stopped all TV, and there were only 3 networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, and local, but the big networks shut down all programming to cover the funeral of President Kennedy. And it was extremely sad and shocking. And what I noticed is there were no cartoons on, there was no children's programming, and there was not even advertising on. And so I took as a fact that if the world gets really bad, there won't be any advertising or entertainment on TV. They'll just cover the news. So I kind of got through my head that if the world is so bad, but there's still television advertising going on, because you can watch something pretty ghastly, then they cut to a commercial for yogurt or a diet program. It's just kind of weird to watch something ghastly, but then they cut to commercials to buy a new automobile. Mick Jagger immortalized that sentiment, and I can't get no satisfaction. He said, a man comes on the radio telling me how white my shirts can be, and I can't be a man because he doesn't, and he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarette as me. And I think that was a song had an impression on me. I understood it even when I was young, that yeah, the advertising can falsify reality. So if there is a mass landing on these drones, then they won't be doing advertising. They won't cut from the mass landing in the East Coast of the United States to, why don't you book your hotel with some internet program today, your next trip? They won't be doing that. So this was a defining moment in propaganda. Then MK Ultra, secret government program that came out. And I remember when I was young in high school watching the Senator Church, the church hearings on MK Ultra, all the documents that were destroyed, a lot of the documents that were destroyed by the CIA director. And then the moon landing was fake. I remember watching the moon landing in 1968, and it was amazing. It was just amazing that I could go outside and look at the moon, and there were but they say this is fake. That looks like a Mole Richardson head, by the way, on film. And if it is, it'd be a lot brighter. Those are monsters. I had Mole Richardson as a client when I was with Phillips. So that's another place. Again, that's another type of conspiracy. Now, I'm jumping ahead. I found this online, and this is like one of those amazing charts where they put it all together, and at the center of it's the CIA, the Pentagon, Nazi Germany, Hitler, Federal Reserve, FBI, Baphomet, and someone out there has put all this together. So you can see the technology, the CIA, the USSR, China, extraterrestrials. You can see all these themes. You can see all these themes played out. The military-industrial complex, depopulation, Richard Nixon, Watergate, Illuminati, psychic warfare, remote viewing. COINTELPRO, and MJ12. So as technology proliferated and the world grew and the economies grew and secrecy grew, disinformation from our own governments, fake news, lies, conspiracy theories, the horror of the Holocaust. So much goes on. The assassination of JFK, but this is an interesting chart because it's all in one place. There's Michael Aquino. Some people out there doing some interesting work on that. Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. So Scientology fits in there. And then, of course, there's Oliver North involved in Reagan's, with the Sandinistas, drugs for guns. And so obviously the government has done stuff we don't know about, but it comes out later through leakers. And in Scientology in the 80s, when after it lost tax exemption in 1967, it was very anti-government. And in Freedom Magazine, Robert Von Young was writing a lot about, he was a member of Scientology at the time. He was writing a lot about MK Ultra. It's nothing Scientology discovered. It was, Robert von Ferk was very good, but it was derivative. It was secondary. Yeah, Fletcher Prudy overlaps between Scientology and Kennedy conspiracy circles. Correct. Yeah. Fletcher J. Prudy, who said that L. Ron Hubbard's records were sheep dipped, wrote books on the Kennedy conspiracy circles. So yeah, there are overlaps and connections. William Burroughs was a Scientologist. And the remote viewing program called Operation Stargate, it had Scientologists. I think they left the church by then. They had Hal Puthoff, Ingo Swann, most notably. They were involved in CIA's remote viewing. Back then, there was the U.S. was concerned with a missile gap. Do we have as many missiles as Soviet Union? We need to build more missiles so there's not a missile gap. So there were always these arms gaps. And word got out from what I've read that the CIA got wind that the Soviet Union was doing research into paranormal and psychic abilities. And so the CIA said, yeah, let's invest some money to see if there's anything to it. And this goes into the idea that Hubbard had promised that you could exteriorize or leave your body. And one of the tests that you were supposed, in early Scientology, and Hubbard withdrew it, you were supposed to leave your body and go read a book in England or go over to another place, another country, and telepathically tell your friend to write you a letter, and that would be proof. And this goes into the idea that L. Ron Hubbard was kidnapped and killed in 1972 and replaced by a body double. What falsifies that is when Hubbard died, they fingerprinted the body. The sheriff coroner up there in San Luis Obispo, and they verified the fingerprints he had when he was arrested for kiting a check, as we call it, writing a bad check in San Luis Obispo. And he also had given his fingerprints to the FBI. He made his whole crew do that. So, but anyway, yeah, Fletcher Prudy. So that you have this really interesting ties where Scientology is not necessarily involved, but people out there can reverse engineer Scientology into it. Or you have people like Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff, who were Scientologists, who are involved in CIA remote viewing. So there's definite ties. A lack of hard evidence in most cases. You don't have an actual document, despite FOIA being 70 years old. And that's what I've been saying. So this chart's real interesting because there's so much in there. They've even added Trump, Nikola Tesla, the Real Society protocols. I mean, this is like quite an impressive thing going on. So Project Bluebeam, L. Ron Hubbard, the idea that Project Bluebeam, that there'll be a fake extraterrestrial landing that will falsify religions and result in one world government. In 1970s, the best-selling book was Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth. And they didn't count religious book sales back then, but that was the best-selling book. And Hal Lindsey, who I've met before, we had a nice chat over at the old TBN headquarters in Costa Mesa, Trinity Broadcasting Network. Hal Lindsey said that the rapture would happen before 1988. He didn't say it explicitly, but he said Israel was reestablished in 48, and Jesus said, "This generation shall not pass until these things, come to happen." So we thought there would be a rapture by 1981, 7-year period of tribulation, and that the Antichrist would establish a one-world government. So even going back, the thinking is that the Antichrist, that is the devil incarnate, would come back as the Antichrist. The blessed would be the saved people, the Christians would be raptured off the planet Earth. And then there would be the Great Tribulation, 7 years, 3.5 years of peace, followed by 3.5 years of war leading to Armageddon. But right at that midpoint, the Antichrist would commit what's called the abomination of desecration, in which the Antichrist would set in the restored temple in Jerusalem, where the Dome of the Rock is now. So the Dome of the Rock would have to be destroyed, an Islamic holy site. The Dome of the Rock would have to be destroyed and a new temple built. And there's people in Israel funding that. They want that to happen. But the Antichrist would set in the restored temple at Jerusalem, which was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. And that's quite a story. But the Antichrist would set himself up as God in the restored temple at Jerusalem and establish a one world government. You'd be required to have a mark in your hand or your forehead. That's called the mark of the beast. And without it, you could not buy or sell. So there's parallels to Christian eschatology. That is, eschatology is study of the end times, and Project Bluebeam. Because now, one thing that Hal Lindsey pointed out, even though his timeline was wrong, the book was compelling because the events in the Middle East looked like we were headed toward World War III and Armageddon. In Armageddon in the Bible, there's the plains of Megiddo in Jerusalem, where there would be a giant war on the plains of Megiddo, where the book of the Revelation of St. John the Divine, known as the Book of Revelation, the blood would go up to the horses' bridles, and it would end in a thermonuclear disaster. And if God himself didn't intervene, everything would be destroyed. So at that last cataclysmic moment on the plains of Megiddo and the Battle of Armageddon, Christ comes back, steps his foot on the Mount of Olives from which he ascended, and stops everything. So right now, because of events in the Middle East, in the Bible, Gog, Magog is called Russia, and Russia comes down, Gog comes down to do battle. And so Hal Lindsey and others, but particularly Hal Lindsey, really made this popularized. So now events in the world, especially in the Middle East, suddenly the Russians invading Ukraine, Israel taking out Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria. It looks like things could be shaping up for World War III again. I've seen this a few times in my lifetime. I think the boomers out there, we've seen it. We came close a couple of times, and to World War III. So now these times are so ripe, and they somewhat resemble the biblical eschatology presented by Hal Lindsey in the 70s, especially concerning events in the Middle East and Israel. There's some resonances. But we also have the ET factor. And Hal Lindsey never posited that, because when I was in the Pentecostal church, the Assemblies of God, flying saucers and UFOs were viewed as satanic counterfeits. These were manifestations of Satan, and they were intended to lead people astray. So now with the drones showing up, the idea of a one world government being established by an Illuminati, which is a fusion of extraterrestrials and humans that act in league to control America, that is the shadow government, the secret government, seems more real. A couple things I wanted to show you, books I've read over time from my collection. Carl Jung wrote a book, a monograph called Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the skies. Toward the end of his life, Carl Jung was quite fascinated, the great Swiss psychotherapist, with this was going on. And I don't recall the year of publication exactly, and I don't have my glasses on, but he's talking about this and relating it to, and you can see his cover art goes back to medieval times when people were seeing UFOs. Other things, there have been a lot of books out, Hyperwar. It's conflicts and competition in the AI century. This is a book of essays about hyperwar. Earlier, going back to the OSS CIA period, this is The Game of Nations by Miles Copeland, who is the father of the drummer of the Police, Stuart Copeland, fantastic, and Miles, who was their manager. And this particular book is talking about the Game of Nations. It's a very interesting book. Miles was an early spook, OSS CIA type. And I want to draw your attention. It says, to His Excellency, President Ferdinand Marcos. Let me see. To His Excellency President Ferdinand Marcos. I just have to read it. With respect and good wishes. And it's signed by Miles Copeland. Now, this actual copy, after the fall of President Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines, how this left the library of Ferdinand Marcos, this signed Miles Copeland, and wound up in my hands is an interesting story. But this was from Ferdinand Marcos' private library when Miles Copeland met Ferdinand Marcos. So, when there's been a lot of literature and books, and if you go on Amazon, it's just amazing. So the one book I brought up before and I've mentioned, Alien Agenda by Jim Marrs. When Marty Rathbun was out, he said that this was a favorite book of David Miscavige, and he had ordered the whole base to read it. And it says, investigating the extraterrestrial presence among us. So this is fitting into the belief that extraterrestrials walk among us. This is compatible with Scientology teaching. Project Bluebeam would be compatible with L. Ron Hubbard's idea of the Marcab Mass Landing. And I believe this is let me just go this. Oh, going back further, I just wanted to show you this. Grimoires were ancient books of how to communicate with spirits. And they have their analogs in that the Illuminati, humans, they have a way to communicate with the ETs. So those are analogs. So the grimoires are replaced by somehow we communicate with ETs. This is a famous grimoire by a Catholic Pope Honorius in the this is 1760. And again, this is interesting. This is there's always secret languages that the public wouldn't understand. This is an alchemical table of symbols, the precursor of the periodic table. But back then there was the idea of secret codes, sigils, secret ways to communicate. And there are analogs of that, of how the Illuminati communicate, how they transmit information telepathically, or in other ways, how you get technology. And basically some of the language. What the slide I was looking for was actually L. Ron Hubbard on OT3. L. Ron Hubbard on OT3, let me see, I think I have that. He said something pretty amazing, and I have it. Oh yeah, okay, let me share a screen with you. I'm going to remove that. I'm just going to share what L. Ron Hubbard said about the Marcab Mass Landing in OT8 and how this all kind of summates. Okay, I have this on my blog. Did L. Ron Hubbard consider himself to be the Antichrist? Did L. Ron Hubbard consider himself to be the Antichrist? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. And the original OT8, I'm going to make this larger. The original OT8 has been covered, and we know that Hubbard called himself the Antichrist. So I'm going to read this, just this one quote. Let me know, is that large enough? Do you need, let me make it a little bit bigger. Is that good? Can you read that? Just put yes if you can. Okay. So Hubbard said on the OT8, which was withdrawn after it was delivered on the ship to disastrous results, he said, quote, "No doubt you are familiar with the Revelations section of the Bible where various events are predicted. Also mentioned is a brief period of time in which an archenemy of Christ, referred to as the Antichrist, will reign and his opinions will have sway. All this makes for very fantastic, entertaining reading, but there is truth in it. The Antichrist represents the forces of Lucifer, literally the light bearer or the light bringer. Lucifer being a mythical representation of the forces of enlightenment, the Galactic Confederacy. My mission could be said to fulfill the biblical promise represented by this brief Antichrist period. During this period, there is a fleeting opportunity for the whole scenario to be effectively disrailed, which would make it impossible for the mass Marcabian landing, the second coming. The second coming is designed, among other things, to trigger a rapid series of destructive events." And unquote. So that's pretty amazing. Hubbard, someone made Hubbard familiar with the scenario laid out in the book of Revelation, except Hubbard said that Lucifer was the light bringer because in some schools, Lucifer means the bringer of light. And he's calling himself the Antichrist when he says, "My mission could be said to fulfill the biblical promise." So this is where Hubbard's soaring ego actually, he injects himself into the Christian Bible and says he's the central figure of the book of Revelation, and that really the second coming will be the Marcab Mass Landing. So this is the tie-in to Scientology and Project Bluebeam, so that Scientologists, is very possible, if they wanted to, they could say Hubbard wrote about it, but the problem is this. Hubbard said that there would be a Marcab Mass Landing. That's actual physical hardware ships landing, and that he would prevent the destruction from happening. He would prevent the destruction from happening. So you have Project Bluebeam. It has some resonance to something that Hubbard wrote. But here's the problem is OT8, if we go back to it, Hubbard called Jesus a PDF file, as Nora calls it. And I'm not going to read this. You can freeze the screen and look at it. He said it was all Marcab PR. What Jesus was teaching was Marcab PR. And this is very interesting. I'll put the link in. But basically, George White and so many others were there and had the original OT8. Jesse Prince is corroborated as authentic, so is Frank Oliver, former Guardian's office. Stephen Fishman introduced the original OT8 documents into his court case. And this is why I took time to document this on my blog. L. Ron Hubbard Jr., Nibs, he changed his name to Ron DeWolf. He gave an interview to Penthouse magazine in '83, in which he said his father considered himself to be the devil. I think this is one of the most interesting interviews out there, and I've Penthouse is defunct. It went out of business a long time ago. It was a competitor to Playboy. But this interview with Ron Hubbard Jr. is absolutely fascinating. I urge you to read it if you want to get it. So there are some parallels to Project Bluebeam, and who knows what's going on? I don't know what the drones are. The things I've been looking for, like information on radar cross section, because some of these drones are supposed to be big as an SUV, or I've heard a school bus. And unless they're totally stealth, you'd have some radar cross section. You would hopefully have some radio frequency emissions, RFI emissions you could scan. When the Chinese balloon floated over the US was able to get electromagnetic information, hack into its computer. According to analyst Peter Zion, geopolitical analyst Peter Zion, who I follow, they let the balloon float over. Biden gave the order to, because they were able to access computers and go into Beijing and actually download information. They got all the frequencies the balloon was using. They obtained a great deal of intelligence information, took it for everything. Then when they got all the information they wanted, they shot it down. Chuck Beatty, wow. LRH told Nibs that LRH thought he was the devil. Right up the Lucifer admission, OTA. Yeah, Chuck, see, that's an interesting parallel. L. Ron Hubbard said that his father told me he thought he was the devil, the most powerful being ever. And that does parallel the OT8 information. So I appreciate you pointing out that, Chuck. That's an interesting parallelism. So we don't know what the drones are. Do they have because like one thing you could do is you could just use thermal imaging to see if they're putting out heat. Do they have a heat signature? You can certainly use a scanner to see RF frequencies. You could get night vision, either fighters or Apaches to shoot one down. I mean, so the big question is like, what is our government doing? What's going on? I think Bluebeam is bogus. It's just our military vendors testing their goods for future sales. Maybe no one knows what they are at present, but the suspicion is that the U.S. government knows what they are. And I'll tell you now, this is anecdotal for me. I lived in Antelope Valley for 10 years, Quartz Hill, out there at 70th West and L8, right along Gooder Ridge. And we were near Edwards Air Force Base, and there were some weird things that happened. Sometimes our power would go out, there'd be frequencies, and I thought there'd be strange things in the sky. And I thought Edwards was just testing stuff on the local population. When I worked at Hughes Aircraft, and right out of college, I had clearances. Some of the old timers told me there was a gigantic blackout of several days in the early 60s on the East Coast. And a guy I worked with swore, he was in the Navy at the time, he said U.S. aircraft did that we were testing a device to knock out power grids from airplanes. And then later, as I understand, that happened. So there's all kinds of things. The drones are scanning for radiation from a possibly dirty boom boom. I've heard that they're scanning for radiation. And so if something's going on like a dirty bomb, you would have vehicles on the ground as well, because I mean, they could be doing anything. We just don't know. But I've heard that theory, Tim, that they are scanning for that. So we don't know what the government's withholding. If the Pentagon says reassuring statements that no security risk involved, then what are they saying? It's us, don't worry. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I'll tell you how good technology is. One of the first targeted assassinations with a drone was a terrorist leader, and a U.S. drone acquired him driving in his car, Mercedes, with 3 other terrorists. And they verified that it was the terrorist leader they were looking for through facial recognition technology from a drone that was quite far away. And you've all seen the high image resolution where we can get license plates from space, people from space. So they got this terrorist leader. The drone fired a Sparrow missile right at the car door of the Mercedes and blew it up to kill the terrorist leader, but it was also to send a message to the terrorist leaders' families that you better not be with your husband, or your brother, or whoever he is, because we're going to take people out. We're going to take the whole car out, the whole party out, the whole wedding out. So it means it's very interesting of what's going on, but you can see it would play to Scientology. It's conceivable. I haven't seen anything yet in the free zoner communities. Those are people who practice Scientology outside the church, or Scientology, talking about it. I'm wondering if Grant Cardone has tweeted on it. I haven't been checking on Grant's tweets. He's usually on top of these things. So Leigh Dundas, who's a Scientology lawyer who was QAnon in the 2020, she was there at the Capitol during the insurrection. She hasn't tweeted about it. But what do Scientologists think? Are any of you hearing from anyone? I'd like to know what Scientologists are thinking and what they're making of it, especially given that David Miscavige liked Alien Agenda. If nothing else, certainly they could use it to raise money. They could use it to raise money. One of the books I wanted to recommend, this is called The Lucid View. I read that, and this is a really interesting book. So I've been interested in conspiracy theories, technology, ETs, like everyone else, and I think it's pretty amazing what's happening. Two things I wanted to point out. If you remember the Borg, they had a cube ship. Right when this book came out, Advanced Procedures and Axioms, this is like the Borg cube. And Scientology is so deft at stealing potent cultural symbols that I think this is supposed to remind you of the cube of the Borg. You will be assimilated. You will become a Scientologist. Resistance is futile. That kind of thing. So another book I pulled out of my collection that plays to this whole idea of a cult, Illuminati, is they took the pyramid they use in Dianetics, and it looks like it's being diffracted, but you can see the beams converging toward a distant point. It almost looks like the beam is shooting at the pyramid, separating it into 4 layers. So they have these very much space opera covers. And so the motif of extraterrestrials is big in Scientology. It's very usual in auditing past lives where you were on different planets doing different things. So that cover re-stimulates the Roddenberry plant. That's funny. Yeah. So what are Scientologists thinking? What are going on with the drones? I like this chart. If you had to fit the drones into this chart, if we had to update this chart, because there's so much here, whoever made this chart did a great idea of just putting down a lot of things. Not sure how they tie together. But Scientology is on there to the far left lower corner. Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, 1954. And it's quite something. So, this is like a who's who of conspiracy theories. It's a phenomenal chart. And I think, let me see if I have anything else. I want to show you, L. Ron Hubbard was always interested in. This is from the Mission Earth series, of course. The Decalogue is 10-volume. Death Quest, Mission Earth Volume 6, Death Quest. But you can see this is, this guy has like a death ray gun. And there's like a private investigator type guy with a hat and trench coat. Police motorcycles knocked down. And this cover art, you can see there's a motel there where pets are welcome. Pets are welcome. But the police are down. There's anarchy here in Death Quest. So, so anyway, let me know. Email me. What does this say? Mark Lombardi made artwork out of those conspiracy connection charts. Oh, That's amazing. Jeffrey picking on LRH again. Leave Ron alone. He's a misunderstood genius and madman and inspired cult leader and insecure narcissist. Brendana, yeah, can we get Ron in on? Yeah, yeah, just bring Ron in from T2. Ron, what do you think of that? Jeffrey, I am a misunderstood genius, and only only a madman believes he's not mad. I am an inspired religious leader. I am the principal author of the textbooks of Scientology, but I am not an insecure narcissist. I'm very secure in my narcissism. You can ask Mary Sue. That was a joke, though she did wind up in prison. Thank you, Ron. So, yeah, that's a misunderstood. You know, that interview where Hubbard says, where he's asked in that phony Tony Hitchman interview, or no, done that. No, that was the other interview. Their solid interview. Do you consider yourself a madman? He goes, only a madman considers himself not mad. Something like that. Can you channel Ron singing to? I can't get that low. It's like, thank you for listening. It's La Envoy, L apostrophe ENVOI. Aaron Hubbard. You can hear him singing. He's like a bullfrog. He's got a really deep voice. So one, what will happen to the drones? Where do they come from? I think it's the U.S. government. I could be wrong. Maybe it is ETs and the government don't tell. I don't know at this point. Nobody knows. But it's certainly suspicious because the government is so good at acquiring data and information. The National Security Agency, National Reconnaissance Organization, the CIA, the amount of spy planes we have. Maybe they need to put Elon Musk to work on this. Maybe these are Tesla ETs. I don't know. They are looking for something though, because it's confined to an area. And what one of our commenters, there's a consensus building around the idea. What Tim posted here, there's somewhat of a consensus. But see, the thing is, I could go buy a Geiger counter. I mean, I could just go buy one like that and go scan myself. So Geiger counters, who knows what they're looking for? But anyway, that's how Scientology kind of fits into it. Project Bluebeam, Roseanne Barr's texting about it. A lot of people are, and I'm not disputing any text because I don't know. I just don't have enough knowledge to dispute anything, and I'm not certainly not going to dismiss anything because when you don't have any evidence, and you have free speech, a lot of people think it's blue beam, which would mean one world government. I don't know. It doesn't seem likely. It seems like you need a lot more. It seems like just if you were going to do that, it seems like you would have to have ships globally in all the capitals of the world. And going back to the 60s, the day the Earth stood still, where the UFO lands on the yard of the White House. When I was a kid, that movie scared me. Really was terrifying. The day the Earth stood still. That was terrifying to me as a kid when they landed on the White House lawn. Wow. So anyway, yes. Thank you, Joe. Smash that like button like it was an extraterrestrial after you, and a like because of course I'm insecure. I need the like, and oh yes, the one man in the world who never believes he's mad. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh yes. Oh yes. The one man in the world who never believes he's mad is the madman. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks for that correction. I just couldn't get the quote. But yeah, hit that like button and we'll find out what happens with the drones. But email me, reach out if you hear anything about Scientologists talking about Project Bluebeam, or are these the Marcabs that David Miscavige fears? Are the Marcabs finally coming for David Miscavige? Ooh, well, they're coming to take him to target too. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. I like military hardware, as you know, so we're going to go out again on the B1. And I will see you next time when we have an update. Thanks for watching so much.